Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Environment Scrutiny Committee, which as always at the moment is being held remotely and can be viewed on YouTube and through the County Council website. So my name is Rob Bird, and Chair of the committee, and welcome to everybody. And I'm just checking that I'm still waiting for one member to join us, but I'll go through the preliminaries. Item 1 on our agenda this morning, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Rippington, and we also have apologies from Councillor Ward, and Councillor Rachel Smith is very kindly substituting for Councillor Ward. Welcome, Councillor Smith. Welcome to the various officers who are here. That I think deals with, we're just expecting, so Councillor Orford isn't with us just at this very moment, it seems, but we are expecting him to appear any moment, so we will continue. Item 2 is the minutes of our meeting on the 24th of November, which you should all have been able to see. Does anybody have any comment that they wish to make? By the way, I will just say that to everybody, members of the committee, if you wish to speak, please use the electronic system in the first instance, but I will also acknowledge hand gestures. For technical reasons, I might not see all the electronic hands because of the I think I need to reload my WebEx. So, as I said, I will look out for hand gestures, and I will be constantly checking with Sophie for if she's got any advice on anybody else who's wishing to speak. So hopefully we can get through things successfully that way. Back to the minutes. Does anybody have any comment they wish to make on the minutes? It would appear not at the moment, in which case I will need to get them accepted. Could I have a proposer, please, to accept the minutes? Actually, yeah, thank you, Councillor Cromwell, and a seconder, and thank you, Councillor Patel. And do we all accept them then, therefore, as an accurate record? Yep. Okay. In which case, Sophie, can we take that the minutes have been? Yep. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, and I think, yep, Councillor Orford has just joined us. Welcome, Councillor Orford. Moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody wish to make any declaration at this point? And I can't see any. Okay. No. Am I muting? Right. Moving on. Item 4, which is the electric vehicles infrastructure update. And I think so the report is on the agenda, published agenda, and I think it's over to you, Phil Williams, to present your report, and then we'll, I think, go into questions from members. Phil.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, so in last March, the committee received a presentation from myself and from Atkins, who'd been helping us work on developing the ultra-low emission vehicle strategy. That provides the sort of broader context for the electric vehicle infrastructure work. And following that, in fact, we brought in some additional resources to help with developing the sort of putting the meat on the bone, so to speak. We had slight sort of unexpected surprise obviously with COVID, and the need to take a lot of time to work on the transport, parking and highways sort of response there. Also, we unfortunately had an issue with some staff capacity that brought in, and so in the summer, I then went back to Atkins later in the summer to get some additional support from them. So we have had a little bit of a bumpy ride there. What I would say is we have had some really good progress during this time, really understanding what is available in the market. There's a lot of wishful thinking and ideas about what we could do, but I think it's really important that what we want to buy can actually be provided. We've been able to learn by networking with other local authorities in the Southwest and Midlands, working with the electricity supply network company to understand the limitations there. We've been in discussions with the Energy Savings Trust, who are administering the government's grant funding scheme, and that has also helped. They've been challenging us and looking at the locations and asking useful questions about our strategy and the sites. And we've been working very closely with the commercial procurement team in the council, who to use a new government, I'll call it a framework. I think it's a dynamic purchasing system. It's the way that we'll go through the procurement. So as it stands, we are actually really well progressed on the development of the specification and the tender documentation and all that. And the next move is I am completing the draft for a cabinet member to consider before the cabinet member makes a decision. That decision will be, if he supports this, will be to adopt the ULEV strategy and to allow us to press the button on the tender process, which will be ready to go within days of that decision, because we've been running the two in parallel. So I'd just like to add that one of the things that we are aware of is we've been working with somebody who's been I think he's seconded from the city council, but Gloucestershire's got 6 district councils, and we have deliberately sought to make our procurement contract available to other local authorities in Gloucestershire and other bodies in Gloucestershire, so that if they wish to use it, they can just, they don't have to go through all the process we've had to go through. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. First one I can see is from Councillor Orford. Over to you, Councillor Orford.
Sorry, Chair, it was because I raised my hand to declare an interest and didn't take my hand down. I've not got a question for Philip, sorry.
Right. Did I miss you with the interest then? Sorry.
Yeah, it's only my standing one in relation to anything wet, to be honest, Chair.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Cheers.
Right. Okay, I understood. Moving on then, I'm looking for any questions for Phil. I can't see any electronic hands. Is anybody, am I missing? Councillor Cromwell, I can see you. Go over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, basically my question, Phil, is how far away are we? I mean, how far away are you from presenting it to the cabinet member, and then so how far away are we from potentially rolling some stuff out?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part, but yeah, once we've got the decision from the cabinet member, we are only a few months away now from that. So we're looking at something if we can get some in just before the end of this financial year, that is ideal, and it's still just about possible. And certainly, around that time and just after that time, we will be getting them on the ground. We're going to be doing this in phases. So the The good news is that some of the kit has basically while we were originally looking at points that you could plug one vehicle into, they're now mean more of them are made with 2 points. So we will be looking at getting we are expecting to be able to exceed the number of points that we originally wanted to put in. The other thing is we have been really pushing OLEV and the government to treat us differently because we're a county, not the nominal limit for funding that they would give us was originally sort of on paper £100,000. That is definitely not the case, having been discussing it with them. So we've got enormous amount of leverage that we believe we can get from the government funding because we have our own money. Many councils haven't been putting their own money into this, and they are entirely under the control of the charging companies who decide where those charging points go and how much they charge, what the tariff is, to be clear. So until we've been through the procurement and we've got the money agreed by the government, then I don't want to put figures out there exactly, but there's potentially a lot of money that we're going to be able to draw in here. And the groundwork was really important because we could have thrown our own money at this. But when you can get £3 from the government for every pound you put in, it's worth making a bit more of an effort.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Cromwell, do you want?
Yeah, well, so we're talking about potentially, if it's before the financial year, we're talking about potentially rolling something out in March, I would imagine. The next question is obviously where, because obviously there's several councillors on this committee at the moment that will all be thinking, right, well, can I have some? Can I have some? Can I have some? Have you got a rollout programme, and where are you planning on starting, and where are you planning on not doing, so that obviously we know, basically where to expect them and where not?
I think the steer from the committee and the steer from all the experts we've spoken to is really to start in the areas where there is the greatest on-street residential demand, because that is there are strings attached to the grant. It's got to be for residents on street. So the hotspots, the hottest hotspots are in Cheltenham. There are some in Gloucester, and there are some in obviously in Tewkesbury and other market towns. But that's why I talked about this being a phased approach. Just because we start in Cheltenham and Gloucester doesn't mean it will only be in Cheltenham and Gloucester. But we have to bear in mind that at the end of the day, if you're spending sort of £7,000 or £8,000 on a charging point, it doesn't look great if one person is using it, and after a year, that one person is still the only person using it. So we do have to have a sort of balance between getting good utilization in places where people will use it, and also social equity and consideration about people who are living, in areas which are harder to serve. Bear in mind, most people will be charging from the driveways, and there are other charging opportunities, a bit like the idea of a petrol station, where you can go to the supermarket while you're doing your shop. You can be charging your car. So there is a very mixed market for electric vehicle charging. We are part of it. I mean, we're an important part, but we're not the only part.
I mean, obviously, we will be able to have some sort of, when it's agreed and when it's rolled out, will we be able to see some sort of program of where and what and how? And also, there was talk in some places, because obviously on the street is sometimes difficult, because obviously once a car parks there and charges, you know, for them to go out at 10 o'clock at night to move their vehicle, or 11 o'clock at night to let somebody else charge, isn't going to, that changeover isn't going to happen. Are we going to have some sort of, I know we talked about maybe having some sort of mini transport hubs where you have a location for that, and also, you know, the bikes and all the other things as well. So they were like going to be hubs set up. Is that still the case?
I think more likely to go with sort of dispersed park, you know, putting a few chargers in a street. It's I think the point about the process that we've got, though, is that it is a sort of organic process. What we didn't want to do was to start now with the list of 200 charging points and say this is our roadmap, because actually we don't have a list of 200. We couldn't come up with a list of 200 right now, and by the time we get to 2022, that list would have changed. So we are, just as in the last year, there's been enormous growth in the take-up of electric vehicles, far beyond what anyone thought there would be. We need to be able to sort of respond in a more agile way to the demand, and what we're looking for from our suppliers as well is to assist us with that intelligence and to help us with matching both requests for sites from yourselves and from your constituents, and matching that with predicted demand, and where those requests are in areas which have all the right ingredients, so that it's not just, you know, one person who happens to be very articulate making their point that they want a charging point, but actually in the end they are probably going to be the only user. It's important that we combine, sort of, we get a mix of helping the people who have been those early adopters, but making sure that we've also put them in locations where there is going to be a greater market, where their neighbours and other people in the street are likely to be buying these electric vehicles. Because we have got people who, we have got streets with lots of off-road parking, and that's not a good place for us to be putting electric vehicle charging, even if one person says, oh yeah, it'd be really good for me, because if the rest of the streets got off-road parking, it's going to be empty.
Councillor Cromwell?
Thank you.
Actually, I mean, there may be others wanting to, but interesting if I could just, because it's following up on your point there, Phil, you know, it's an interesting concept about how you judge potential utilisation, and you talk about, you know, streets with lots of off-road parking. Well, you know, the problem for a significant number of residential streets in Tewkesbury town is that hardly any parking at all. Finding somewhere to park their car is the problem, never mind charge it. And so actually, you know, the concept of what of how you deliver this in somewhere like Tewkesbury is quite complicated. And I would urge, you know, you set out a priority list there of Cheltenham, Gloucester. You mentioned Tewkesbury town. You mentioned other market towns, but you know, I would say, you know, specifically Tewkesbury towns, the residential streets in the middle of Tewkesbury have some very specific issues which need addressing, and you know, I would urge you to consider that in your. I don't know how you're going to assess the potential market, to be quite honest, and perhaps you could elaborate on that, because you said, you know, there's no, absolutely, you don't want to be putting in expensive kit where only one person's going down the street's going to use it. That's absurd. How do we judge the likely take up?
With residential areas, a number of different organisations seem to be adopting a similar approach, where they are using a lot of different data sets to understand the demographics of the area, and that's a range of factors, from economic factors to social ones. So there are going to be communities who are less inclined to, less able to afford at the moment, to be blunt, electric vehicles. And there will be communities where there is less interest in having an electric vehicle, or equally there are some communities which have stronger green credentials, if you can call it that. These are all what we're doing, and what we have been doing is getting views from a number of different organisations, and they do seem to share that type of approach, but they do need the local authority input and knowledge and what's on the ground, because sometimes they use those tools and they come up with locations that don't make sense.
And I'm glad you've just said that, Phil, to be quite honest, because, you know, when you were talking there initially about basically what you're talking about is database marketing, you know, of the sort that we see with all kinds of things, you know, who's likely to buy which newspaper and all that sort of stuff. And I just think, you know, and you use the phrase green credentials. Well, I think that's quite a narrow alley to go down, if you like, because we're talking about people and their personal needs and the decision that they will make as to whether or not a particular type of car suits them and their life, you know, how they organise their lives, which is anyway, to come back to the point, I'm glad you made the reference about local knowledge. You talked about local authorities. I would specifically think about local representatives, because we have them, obviously, and that's, you know, because nothing could be better than actually the knowledge and awareness of local representatives and the local councils. I'd much prefer us focusing our thoughts on those than database marketing tools, frankly. I've had my rant or piece. Councillor Patel, I know you were indicating. I'll go over to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Excellent. Just a question around, do we have any idea of how many electric cars are currently circulating in the county? And also, as Philip described, the number of electric vehicle purchases has increased significantly in the last 12 to 24 months. In say 5 years' time, no doubt there will be more electric cars than we have now. So how do we envisage ensuring that the infrastructure will be in place, or additional infrastructure will be there, and whether we have the funding to roll that out in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, etc. Thank you.
I don't off the top of my head have the answer to your first question about the number of electric vehicles, but what I'll do after this meeting is try and get that information. What it will be is on registrations of electric vehicles registered to addresses in Gloucestershire, and I'll get that information back to the DSU and through Sophie to you. In terms of ensuring there's enough infrastructure and funding for that, I think it's as I mentioned earlier, it's a mixed market. So we've got commercial investment, we've got businesses investing in workplace charging. We've also got private citizens in buying their own charging equipment at home. And so for the share that we're looking at, which is primarily on street, for districts it will be different. It will be car parks, off-street car parks primarily. We are putting money in ourselves, but we've also got this. The government has been maintaining the funding and increasing the funding available for electric vehicles, because they've brought forward or planning to bring forward the date by when all new vehicles that are sold must be electric. And to ensure that that was consistent, they, to make sure that the money followed the mouth, they have also been giving more funding to the department that deals with funding local authorities. So, just for example, when we were looking at this project, we were told there was no guaranteed funding in 2021 or in 2022 because they couldn't commit to that. But we all knew that really it was probably just the Treasury saying, you can't formally commit it, but in reality it will be there. And as we've got closer and closer to April, the messaging has changed and become more positive. And we know that there are millions of pounds there for local authorities. So I can't make any promises about funding. It's not in my gift really, but certainly in the next sort of in the short term, the outlook is good. That there's a lot of government funding to help both the councils and private sector to do this. And I would add even things like tax breaks for company cars. It's very, very beneficial at the moment to get an electric vehicle as a company car. Thanks.
Councillor Patel, do you want to come back? Or no? Okay. Is anybody else looking to speak at the moment? I can't.
There was Councillor Rachel Smith and Councillor Stephen Hurst were waiting electronic hands.
I can see Stephen waving his. I'll go to Councillor Smith first, if that's okay. Councillor Smith.
I think she may have just dropped out.
Okay, I'll go first then to Councillor Hurst and come back to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Oh.
You're echoing around the globe at the moment, Councillor Hurst.
I know. I may well have, because I've got on two screens. Let's try and turn one screen off. I've now turned one screen off. Can you still hear me? You can. Hello? Right. My question is, are we working with district authorities who seem to have their own electric vehicle charging, may well have their own policies, but of course it's the siting that's different, isn't it? We will do on-street car parking. They may well have off-street car parking where they want to put charging points. And so are we working with them to get an overall plan of where the charging points are supposed to be going? Otherwise, we're going to be ducking and diving between the two of us.
We're working with some of them, and so working most closely with Gloucester, and we have had some contact with Cheltenham about it. I think they are quite different markets.
Yeah.
And so the most of the district councils will be looking at this sort of town and city centre car parks, and so the area where I believe there is the greatest overlap is in the sharing of experience and also the sort of the contractual sort of angle, which is quite fiddly, quite hard work. I mean, we have had to spend quite a bit of money to acquire some of that technical knowledge, because it is really sort of cutting edge. And if you then said, well, what about other districts? It would seem a shame if every district was spending similar amounts of money on technical advice. We are here. This is part of our climate change strategy. We have put money towards a climate change coordinator. The City Council, I hope, will be recruiting a climate change coordinator soon, and that process certainly has been underway. And we are in a number of our climate change projects. We have shared agenda with many districts where we can share learning and we can try and align our work. So yeah, I think it is hard at the moment to get some of that collaboration and cooperation. The ways that we're working and the pressures that we've been under in the last year have made that a bit harder. But we certainly have had active engagement in the project by the City Council, and if anyone else is interested, we will help, but we're not going to slow down the train, so to speak. I think we've got to get the kit on the ground.
But Phil, there are 5 other district councils that we have really to work with to get an efficient overall county policy. Will we ever achieve that, do you think?
I think our strategy it reflects the fact that there are different players in the market, and our strategy, the draft strategy has been in the public domain, and the sorts of what we're proposing is we've done a lot of benchmarking to try and make sure that what we propose is what people would expect in terms of the tariffs that you pay and where you'd expect to find the charging points, in to start with. But we are at the beginning of a 3-year implementation plan, and there is a lot of opportunity for closer working with the districts, and also with the parishes during that period. The first sites, the ones that the most obvious ones, we can get in, and then we can work on the other ones with our other local authorities. So just because there hasn't been perhaps a lot of collaborative work at this stage, doesn't prevent it from happening.
No, thank you. It's all to go for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I do agree. I think it's important that we're all joined up. But there isn't quite as much overlap as perhaps people think. But there is some overlap.
Thank you both. Councillor Smith, if you're back.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what happened there. Everybody started spinning. It's exciting. On the screen. So thank you ever so much, Philip, for this report and the update. Oh, just spinning there again. I think we're okay. And it's really good to hear some really kind of concrete action. Hopefully, as you say, in the next few years, we should see this kind of some implementation of this. Am I still there?
You are.
I can't see.
We can hear you.
Am I still here? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Right. Keep talking. So I'm curious about.
You might want to might help turn your video off.
Yep.
You don't mind if you.
Go. Keep going. Yeah, I'll do that. If I turn my video off, then might stay connected. I don't know what's going on with our connectivity today. So just going back to because we've been talking a little bit about obviously we're budget setting at the moment, and part of the council strategy is around obviously sorting out its own house in terms of carbon emissions, but then also facilitating as much as possible residents in Gloucestershire and businesses to reduce their own emissions. So from that point of view, I think it's a really, really positive step. Yes, there's always going to be questions about some people will benefit and some people won't, depending on their kind of their locations and that sort of thing. But overall, I think it's a really positive thing. I'd love a little bit more detail on how how it works. If they set one up in a terraced street? Is it just kind of, if it's can serve 2 cars at a time, is that all it will do, or can multiple people kind of use it? And how do they pay for the electricity, or I'm curious about how that will particularly work. But I guess that's in detail more down to the kind of who wins tenders and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting. I think it's also the criteria for implementation, and where will they be placed. So I am conscious of some of the streets where I kind of picture some of the terrace streets in Gloucester and Stroud and Cheltenham, where there's a fair restriction on space, and I just want to get some kind of confirmation that that will be dealt with really sensitively. We won't end up with trailing leads over pavements, and indeed pavements won't be, we're not taking space from pedestrians when we put these in, that if that's residential parking, that actually we're using that space where cars are, rather than taking space from pedestrians and cyclists. I think we touched a little bit on how many vehicles that this will potentially serve, and I'd be curious to know what it's anticipated, how many vehicles it will serve after that first initial 3-year period. Sorry, I'm rattling through thoughts. I've been collecting them as we've been going along. It's really good news about sharing the contract with districts, and I know parish councils, I think, again, will be really pleased with that. I wonder, is there a cut-off with OLEV for the kind of the investment from OLEV at all, and will other district and parish councils be able to take advantage of that? And the last question is just around mapping, because I know that one of the things that kind of puts people off a little bit is this kind of range anxiety, and where can I charge my vehicle? And I wonder whether there's any we've improved our mapping when it comes to, will other people be able to use those when they're not in use, or will it solely be for residents? Okay, sorry, that was a whole load of thoughts and a bit of a jumble.
I'll try to go quickly through, because you've asked quite a few questions. We are looking at open types of payment, not restricting payment to people who are a member of a club or particular manufacturer. There is increasing degree of opening up the markets to make sure that that happens. The criteria for implementation, and you talked about restricted space and things. Essentially, we are looking at areas where there is a significant proportion, a high proportion of the residents can only park on street. And in terms of the things that you've been mentioning, we've been taking into account. So we're not looking at trailing leads and such. And depending on the kit, that if the more compact stuff can fit on pavements in some areas, but otherwise it will be, there will be small islands in the parking bays to accommodate them, which has been used in London and lots of places now. I'm not quite sure what you mean by how many vehicles it will serve. And perhaps you can pick it up in a bit later. The OLEV have financial year goals, I think, and they have a range of different grants available. They don't have a grant for authorities to just put charging points in car parks for shoppers. That is regarded as commercially viable. So if you've got a example, like, I'm afraid he's not here, but Councillor Rippington has mentioned before in Painswick, where there's a parish car park that's used by a lot of residents overnight because they don't have places to park. Now that probably would qualify for the residential charging scheme. So there are some there's some grey areas and ones that we can take advantage of, which OLEV are encouraging us to. And then lastly, about mapping and range anxiety. there are a lot of open source mapping systems out there, so this is the sort of information that has to go onto those, so that it's easy for people to see where the charge points are and whether they're occupied or not. Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure about how many vehicles it will serve. Certainly, these are not dedicated charge points to a householder or a particular motorist. They will be shared points, and depending on the location, we may well have a legal requirement that those parking bays can only be used by electric vehicles, but it does depend on the location. Thanks.
Councillor Smith?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. You answered the question at the end. I was just, I was just curious about that they're not kind of, you don't claim them as one resident or a couple of residents, that they are effectively able to be open to multiple users, albeit with the, kind of responding to the whatever technology, whatever app or whatever. So yeah, okay, that's really helpful. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, were you indicating before? I think I saw your hand as I moved on to Councillor Smith. So I guess it might mean something to do with the previous conversation, but over to you anyway.
No, I just wanted to, I'll wait because I see Councillor Cromwell has a further point to make. I just really wanted to put forward some concluding remarks as and when members of the committee have finished asking questions. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Moore. So I think, where were we? Back to Councillor Cromwell?
Yeah, Philip, you mentioned that obviously manufacturers aren't going to be making, petrol or diesel cars and only electric. Well, they're not going to be making only electric, are they? They're potentially looking at hydrogen as well. So it's not just only electric. And I know BMW are pushing very hard with their hydrogen rollout. And obviously that then may change the dynamic of what we're doing, but obviously we can't say anything about that at the moment. The other thing that worries me, and I really do hope you speak to local members and things before you put out electric charging, because obviously in Tewkesbury, as has been said before, there's a fight for spaces. If you put one electric charging point in one street, because that's all we can afford to put at the moment, you're going to have potentially other people trying to get.
Councillor Cromwell, you seem to have muted.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, so, and that's what I'm trying to say is, we really do need to look at, if we're going to do this, where there's issues in areas, we need to start looking at the local knowledge, because like I said, the last thing I want you to do is put an electric charging point in one street, because at the moment that's part of the rollout, yet there's other streets without it and other electric cars fighting to get to that space and overloading that street with extra cars that it is already overloaded with the residents that live in that street. So it really does need a bit of thought and a bit of, looking at with local members as well, I think.
That's a really important point, which a number of local authorities that we've spoken to have experienced. And it's a very difficult one to please everybody, actually. I'm not going to pretend that we've got a magic wand for this. We have had an example in Gloucestershire of a resident who asked for a charging point in their street, and they were pretty much sort of I don't know what let's just say they fell out with all their neighbours, and I think the local councillor decided that this is probably not going to be a place where we were going to start. So that street is not going to have any charging points for the foreseeable future until there's a change there. But there will come a point where perhaps the tipping point will be reached, where people will say, hang on, actually, we think, the more of us are buying electric vehicles, more of us would like electric vehicle charging in our street. So it may be these things change. And I think the same applies to the technology, that yes, there is hydrogen, but equally, battery technology and other things will change over the next few years. So which one will win the race, I don't know. that we've got to go with what we can do at the moment, and otherwise it is a recipe for just sort of sitting on the side and waiting, which isn't acceptable really. So I don't have a magic answer for the point about the charging bays, but if there is a risk that you just don't have any charging bays in some areas because people will say they don't want it, and that potentially then makes it very unfortunate for anybody who does want to try to be able to charge their vehicles. And most councils seem to be taking quite a strong view about it, that actually it is the right thing to do to have some charging bays. And perhaps to make it easier, you don't just put one in, you know, because certainly if you only have one, then it's there's a bit more of a crush.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, Councillor Cromwell. Yeah, looks like
I can imagine that even if you only put one in one street, my goodness me, you know, if there's 2 or 3 cars there, that the arguments that would ensue would be horrendous.
we'll get you out to referee.
Out with the red card, but forget the refereeing bit.
Right, at the moment, I can't see any electronic hands. Does anybody wishing to speak, please, you want to wave at me, or Sophie, have you got anybody on the list? Doesn't look like it. No. Okay, something else I wanted to bring into this before I come to Councillor Moore, who wanted to add some comments at the end. Phil, it goes back to your initial presentation, and in fact it links to comments just made. I think it was Councillor Hurst, but it's about, you know, coordination amongst authorities, and you know, the procurement process that you've established, that you were talking about, and about sharing that with other authorities. But you didn't go into that any further, as far as I could understand, and I was just wondering if there are already established links in that sense. And I will just be parochial here and just say to you, from the point of view of, you know, the area that I'm in and Tewkesbury Borough Council, you know, we are. You talked about our climate change, the council's climate change strategy, so this is part of it. And as a Tewkesbury Council is looking to dovetail into the county council strategy and support it in every way possible. And obviously, it's a two-way exchange. Do we have those links, or about procurement, or do they need to be established?
I'd have to check with one of my colleagues on that team, because I don't want to say, I'd need to check that. I think the answer is no, but I would like to check, because I haven't been involved in as many of the procurement meetings as some of my colleagues. So
that's fine. I mean, but from my point of view, it was a matter of information. Is this something that we need to? I mean, I'm talking about this as a Tewkesbury representative. Is this something that we need to progress and to take up? And it sounds as though it might be so. Yeah.
What I will do is raise this with the project team and ask them to make those connections with the districts, with each district, so that it's, you know, we can be more proactive about that.
I mean, it's quite understandable in a two-tier system that you will have districts making their own progress and going in slightly different ways, but overall that we should try to coordinate and support each other, and that's great. Thank you, Phil. I'll go then to you, Councillor Moore. You said you wanted to bring in some summarising remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. I think Philip I've been involved with Philip on this for over a year now. Is it a year, or perhaps it's 2 years, Philip?
Time flies.
And at times I've become very impatient, and Philip knows that. But I want to say this morning that I think what Philip's demonstrated, particularly in his answer to the questions, that he's really he and his team have carefully tracked the progress of government funding. And I think got us into a good position to bid for this. And I think that's to be congratulated. I think there's a danger of, when we talk about planning, it's a danger of thinking this is almost like planning new housing or planning new employment areas. And I think we have to be careful. We can't be too prescriptive. This is a market which is developing incredibly quickly now, spurred on obviously by the pandemic. And just to give you an example, in my division, there was a proposal for a major charging station on the Foss near Broughton-on-the-Water on a brownfield site. Well over 10 charging points. It would be one of the largest in the country. There was a lot of objections locally to it, initially including our own highway team. I asked the highway team to look at it again, and in the light of that, we did, in fact, we withdrew our objection. Nevertheless, it went to appeal. The appeal decision came in less than 3 weeks, and the appeal was successful. Now, what do you draw from that? Well, what you draw from that is that this government is very determined to see the planning system be an enabling system in terms of charging. And I think what we haven't really thought about this morning is that as the market develops and investment comes into those charging stations, range anxiety will become less because people will be aware that there are these charging stations in their vicinity. I think that's something that we've got to bear in mind in terms of how we develop our strategy. We could be in a sense almost over-ambitious and then find ourselves in 3 or 4 years' time having invested in charging points, which really may not be necessary because people have got the confidence to find charging in their area. And those of us who are old enough will know how years ago you really didn't have to worry very much about where you get your petrol because the range in your car was not that great. And although there might have been a lot of petrol stations, often they only were open for about 6 or 8 hours in the day. So I think we've got to be careful about this. There's no grand master plan in what I'm saying at this stage. It's going to be intuitive. The market's going to respond, and really the role of the planning system should be, in my opinion, be one of enabling development and not put up the kind of resistance that we saw along the Foss. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. So I think that brings us to the end of this item. I will just throw it out, make sure. Sophie, is anybody else indicating? No, that's fine. Okay, in which case I will say thank you to Phil for presenting and answering the questions, and to everybody else. And we'll move on then to item 5, which is the Executive Director's report. Over to you, Colin.
Just trying to take myself on mute. Sorry, everybody. Good morning. The report this morning is probably is largely, hopefully largely read. But what I'll try and do is update you as we go through, because the Christmas period and obviously the next lockdown, when this was written prior to that, has obviously had an impact already. So I'll try and update you as we go through. I mean, I think what I would say, however, is that as we go through the report, you see that looking back over the last year, the last 9 months, what has been remarkable is how the staff, even through 2 lockdowns and everything else we've gone through, have actually managed to keep most schemes, and most importantly, some of the big major schemes actually on target, which has been quite incredible during that period, given it being so easy to get sidetracked and knocked off course with the response to the immediate responses that were needed to COVID and the various measures we had to input. Sorry. Phone always rings at the most inconvenient time, sorry. So as you say here, I mean, I'll cover COVID as a general response first of all, but moving on to the schemes. First of all, M5 Junction 10 has went through its public consultation during October and November. We're hoping to have a preferred route announcement in the spring. Maybe late spring, it depends at the moment about how that pans out against other things that are going on site and considerations that the Highways England have asked us to look at. but we're hoping to get a preferred route out somewhere around mid-late spring. The land agents have been appointed now, and actually progressing land acquisition to try and secure as much land as possible through negotiation before using CPO. And on the positive side, we've already got our first 2 claims in, which is claimed back about £4 million of historic funding to the council's benefit. So they're quite obviously got large positives. Highway contracts on the term maintenance, professional services are moving forward. I think again, what has been remarkable, considering it was just in March where we normally start the resurfacing and structural maintenance program that COVID hit, where we basically stopped for 6 weeks or so, and then gradually brought the staff back in again and carried on even during first lockdown. Just prior to Christmas, we had actually got ahead of all of our programs as scheduled prior to COVID. So we'd actually recovered all the programs. I'm not sure what's happened over the last couple of weeks. We've probably slipped a little bit again, given what happened over the Christmas period, obviously with the first of all the flooding, and then immediately going from flooding into the gritting, which has caused it did cause a lot of problems for staff who throughout the Christmas period and New Year, it was the same group of people who were dealing with the flooding and then dealing with the gritting. So it was the same group of people out the whole time from just before Christmas to the other side of New Year. So where it says there about in the report about winter readiness, we've had a few gritting runs. Well, that was written in just before Christmas. We had a lot more gritting runs since then. It was a really heavy period. They're going out a couple of times a day after the flooding occurred to try and keep the roads safe. We went straight into the icy period and the snow. The canal bridges now are substantially complete, and obviously the beauty about that is that funding has been secured for the next stage as well. So that will enable the canal to be completed alongside that the cycle route. This is not in the report. That cycle route would then actually join from Stroud right across to Sewell Junction on the canal, on the Sharpness Gloucester Canal, which would then link with the existing cycle route that's being constructed alongside the canal, which would take you right back into Gloucester. So you can start to see then how the network is, that spine of that network is starting to be created. Then we'll have a small gap of about half a mile, which half a mile, 3/4 mile from the end of the canal to the start of London Road scheme, which we just put in during COVID, which then obviously carries on to the B4603 and out to Cheltenham, and then out ultimately to Bishop's Cleeve. So you can see how we're really now starting to connect the dots up and start to form that spine right through the county. The West Cheltenham Cyber Scheme, we've got, as you're aware, we got phases 1 and 2 on site in the summer, actually during lockdown 1, and phases 3 and 4 will be going out on site later this month in lockdown 3. So again, a credit to the staff to get that out. Got a slight problem on site at the moment. A number of people have gone down with COVID, and we're looking now to see, without trying to avoid closing the site down, how we can actually reduce the risks on site. It's not going to be easy at all because of the nature of the work, and we're trying to separate the different groups of people out as much as possible so they work in bubbles to keep the site going. Ashchurch Over Bridge is moving forward well. Detailed design is continuing, and hopefully we will be in a position to get the bridge in for Tewkesbury to enable the road to be built to the garden, the first stage of the garden town, in line with the programme set by Homes England. Community Infrastructure Fund, DFT, Emergency Active Travel Fund, as you're aware, we've got London Road Cycle Scheme in, and we're now developing the rest of that route. And obviously, to me, the important part is trying to find a way that we can get that cycle route right back into the heart of Gloucester to join up with the canal. That is going to be a big challenge. Meanwhile, design continues for the end of London Road out across to the to join up with Cheltenham, and that's going on at the moment. We hope to have that on site later this year. E-scooters have been really well received, very quiet over the Christmas period, had their least use, but that's sort of not unexpected really towards the end of the Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, and then obviously going into lockdown again. But again, still very well used with about 40, nearly 50,000 kilometres has been ridden on the scooters now in the Gloucester, Cheltenham areas. School streets are going well. The two test sites have been received well and working well. B4603, which I just touched on, we've almost got the pot of money. We're not quite. We're probably, by March we might be 1.5 million short. But I've got a number of irons in the fire there. We're lobbying the government. Richard Graham has taken up the case to us with the minister, who's actually very interested to hear how close we are now to delivering that scheme, all but about £1.5 million. So I'm hopeful that we've secured the rest of that money to enable the rest of the schemes we put in. And that's going to be a series from the centre of Gloucester out to the edge of Cheltenham. It's not going to be far off with adding in the Wictis and the phases 3 and 4 of the A40 scheme, and the work going up into the station. It won't be far off about an 18 million pound scheme from the centre of Gloucester. So that's a serious piece of cycle infrastructure that's going in. Junction 9, we should have been out for public consultation at the end of January as programme. We were on programme to do that, but we had a letter just prior to Christmas from Highways England and DfT asked us not to because they were unhappy about one of our options. We decided that on balance we would ignore that and go forward anyway, and then we received a letter from Baroness Vere, not telling us because she couldn't tell us, but saying it would be taken in very, very poor light if we continued. So on the basis of that, we pulled back from moving forward on that, on holding the public consultation, and we've gone back into negotiations with Highways England to try and find alternative, suitable options that are suitable to us and meet our needs, and keep Highways England on board. Meanwhile, unfortunately, in the budget announcement in November, the large local major scheme funding that we were bidding for, which was a 4-year pot, was reduced to a 1-year programme. So at the moment, we're in a little bit of a unknown sort of position, because obviously we're working to bid for in a particular time frame with a programme we knew. It's now being resolved. It's now being reduced back to a 1-year funding programme. DfT has said that shouldn't be a disadvantage, because as soon as we've got the scheme ready to then put in, we can then submit it, and then each scheme will look at on a scheme by scheme basis. Well, obviously, we won't get our scheme in until after this coming year. So obviously, we were aiming for something which we don't know for certain there'll be funding on. But at the moment, the intention is to move forward with the scheme to try and then secure funding in hopefully what will be a 1-year funding scheme that is there for next year. Meanwhile, through our MPs, we're continuing to lobby to gain necessary support for the funding and for the scheme itself. The Gloucestershire South Western Bypass, finally, it got caught up. It was supposed to have its public inquiry, CPO inquiry, last May, but got stopped because of lockdown 1. I thought it was going to happen again with lockdown 2, but we actually was given a virtual CPO public inquiry. Was given a virtual CPO inquiry, which took place on the 24th of November. There were 2 objectors, neither turned up or represented the meeting, so we're hopeful for an early decision on that to move forward. On the other side as well, we continue to carry out negotiations to secure the land without the need for a CPO, and we're very close to achieving that as well. So we're moving forward on 2 fronts and very close to achieving both at the moment. The LTP will be going to Cabinet in this month, in a week, a couple of weeks' time. Just turning to libraries registration, probably just worth mentioning. The registration had from their massive backlog of about 1,800 births, because you might remember in lockdown 1 we weren't allowed to carry out birth registrations. Managed to get that down to 200 just as we went into lockdown 3. It's gone up to 218, so they're still holding their head above water at the moment. They're managing to continue to keep up with the speed they come in, but obviously not clearing the backlog. And libraries have sort of adjusted their services as much as they can. So what they're doing at the moment is we're providing a service, even in lockdown 3. We are providing a service, a click and collect service where people can book a book, reserve a book, and then come and collect it. So there's minimal personal contact. We are, for the most vulnerable, offering a delivery service where they can order their books over the phone or online. And we are, for the most vulnerable in society, keeping booked options of using the IT equipment, which for a lot of people, and a number of people don't have access to a computer. That is quite an important facility for them to get doctor's appointments at the moment, and even order food if they're vulnerable. So we're trying to keep our libraries open on a booked basis to keep those services open as well. And we managed to do that into lockdown 3 at the moment. Waste management is still using the booking system, which is going really, really well. We are thinking at the moment it's going so well and so well received in a public consultation that we carried out, that we are actually seriously considering whether we actually retain it for longer term. It does give some order to the proceedings, and a lot of people do prefer it. Employment skills, adult education. We've now got our new head of adult education started on the 4th of January. And part of my aim, as some of you know, is to what we're doing with the libraries is we've now got agreement to roll out this year, as part of our economic recovery plan for COVID, roll out our innovation labs that we have already in Colford. Has been incredibly successful, to one in each of the districts. So each district will have its own innovation lab in a library, and that will enable sort of so many different. I mean, it will help skill young people. You can teach coding to 5-year-olds. We do at Colford. 10-year-olds can learn how to build a PC, for example. Older children and young people can learn how to use the 3D printers and 3D scanners. And those 3D scanners and 3D printers are also used by SMEs for product development who haven't got those sort of facilities available to them. So it helps and supports them. The Department the DWP are starting to run courses for people who can't get work actually at Colford, and we're looking to run that out into the other innovation labs as soon as we get them in place with the DWP. And DWP are really supportive of that. They're actually driving and paying for most of those courses to be run. And the other thing I want to do as part of this is get the adult working adult education, working with the libraries to take the courses out to the community using innovation labs and the facilities we have there. So again, we can really start to help skill up people to access the sorts of jobs we're going to be creating in the county. And also, from a sustainability point of view, it doesn't mean say everyone has to come into, particularly whilst we've got lockdown periods, into GCC or into the centre into Gloucester and travel. We can actually go out and have outreach courses for people. So it's a part of that whole sustainability economic package as we move forward. So and the other thing is adult ed at the moment in similar mode have running almost all their courses now virtually, but are still staying open again for the most vulnerable for things like IT and specific courses that support the most vulnerable in our society. We're staying open to assist those in the meantime. And that concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Sophie, just for your benefit, I tripped out at some point there. I think if I've got a number of people indicating that I can see, but Councillor Nigel Moore, were you looking to? You've got a hand up. Were you looking to come in on some as the cabinet member?
No, I'm sorry. The usual mistake. I'll take my hand down.
Okay. I've got councillors. Certainly, I know of councillors Orford and Patel. I'll go to Councillor Orford first, if I may.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple for Nigel. In relation to particularly Junction 10, in the consultation, I think pretty much every parish council around that area raised the same issue with me about any potential closure of the A4019 in the future, about the state of the local roads that will become the diversion routes. Certainly Uckington, Elmstone, Ardwick and the Lye. And I wondered, have we budgeted in highways for treatments on those roads before we ever contemplate closing the A4019? If you want to take that one first, or I've got another one in relation to the local transport plan.
Colin, are you able to take the first one?
Yeah, sure. Did you come in, Nigel?
Not at this stage. No, I'll just hear what you have to say, Colin.
Okay. As far as I know, apart from as far as I know, it's only temporary closures, and I thought it was nighttime closures. That program isn't set yet in terms of the A4019 works that are going to happen there. I hadn't seen a program that showed actual definite closures at the moment. I mean, it's just contemplating. Obviously, as soon as if there are diversions of a major nature, which I hadn't believed there were, but if there are, then obviously we will look into alternative routes and the condition of those routes as part of any program of that work. But we probably won't be on site till 2023, late 23. So it is some time away yet.
Thank you. The other one was on the local transport plan, which goes to Cabinet this month and then on to Council. And I'm grateful, given the support that both Vernon and Nigel gave me last week in relation to a review of the recent flooding. You will know, because of the petition, that there is this aspiration about the A417, and I'm wondering if we could at least highlight that in the local transport plan for the future, because that route was underwater for a week. Again, I know people say, well, it's only 1 week a year, perhaps sometimes 2 weeks, but it's getting more and more frequent, and the impacts on the community and certainly the businesses along that route is getting to be pretty dire, particularly with the diversion routes being flooded as well.
Can I answer that one? Phil, can I really encourage you to put a question to me at Cabinet, as you clearly can do on that, and obviously then we'll get a response to that question, which I can then pick up when presenting the plan.
Thank you.
Have you, Councillor Orford? Yeah. Councillor Patel, you were indicating? No, you weren't. Okay, I saw a hand up before. I'm now looking at. I don't have any other electronic hands. Sophie, have you got anybody on?
I've got Councillor Caldwell and Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Caldwell first.
Thank you, Chairman. My hand's been up from before Colin finished, so must be something wrong with your screen.
Oh, there is, and I'm well aware of that. That's why okay. I need to.
Right. Four questions. Two on page 17. One on the strategic, on 4.1, and this is probably not our problem, but the cycle route that ends at Cheltenham Station. Does Cheltenham Station have facilities for safe storage of cycles? And the other one on that page, also to do with rail, is the rail strategy was published in March 2020. Will it be updated before feeding it into the LTP? That's the first two of the four.
Okay. To the best of my knowledge, I think there is already cycle parking at Cheltenham Station. I'm going to ask Philip to clarify in a second. And I believe as part of the project that's going on at the moment, that cycle parking gets increased in size. Philip, do you want to?
Yep, they've just completed 300 secure parking spaces.
Oh, excellent.
So that deals with the first part. The rail strategy at the moment, I mean, that is, there is no intention. I think your question was, are we going to update it? Well, it's less than a year old. It's only 9 months old. So at this moment in time, I wasn't planning to update the rail strategy as such. What we're doing is using that rail strategy to drive the improvements that were secured over the last year, which has already included the starting of the metro service to Gloucester from where are we now? I've lost count of where I am. December this year, I think it is now, 2021. We're in this year, yeah. So that starts with December 21. The additional services that will give that will now stop at Ashchurch, which basically means that Ashchurch will now have an hourly service rather than 2 hourly one it has at the moment. And as you know, last year we used part of that to press the argument for the improved services to London, which now start at about 4:50 in the morning, 4:55 I think from Cheltenham. So the first 3 trains of the day, it's an hourly service now to London under 2 hours. So the first 3 trains now get into London before 9 o'clock in the morning. And last train leaves London at 9. I still like to get the later one. I like to get a train leaving London at 10 or even 11 o'clock to come out, would be my next aim. But at the moment, so you go to the theatre or whatever and go for a meal and still come home by train. But my aim at the moment, I mean, obviously that's a slightly longer term aspiration. The aim at the moment, I think, has got to be, though, those improvements, is making sure that we don't slip backwards, because COVID has meant that because of the pressure on services, on the lack on because of not having enough drivers in place, etc. That the rail companies have really reduced their services and have just reduced them again as a result of this COVID-3, as lockdown 3. I think what we really do, what I think we must be in a position to do, is press hard for the reinstatement of those services as soon as we're out of lockdown, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that if they just go, well, there's not that many people, therefore we don't put the services on. What happens is people don't use the services because they're infrequent. And what we have to do is break that cycle. And in terms of sustainability, so you have to actually invest, first of all, put the services on so people go, oh, it is a regular service and it comes along every hour or every 30 minutes, so it's worth using. If it's only every 3 hours or whatever the case may be, then people decide not to use that service and get straight in their car. So what's really important is we drive those services back to their original position post-COVID, and then we can start to look to build up for the future. But in parallel with that, we've used that rail strategy and also set up the B2B in shadow form, B2B rail partnership, to press Network Rail to change their strategy in terms of the way they were looking at the line. And they are now, and they've taken that on board, and they're what's called continuous modular strategic planning, SCMSP, which is their studies, their new form of studies they're carrying out on a route by route basis. They had our route split between 2, so they only looked at it from Bristol to Worcester and then Worcester north to Birmingham, and that did not help us at all because the services we wanted service to go right through. So we've used that strategy to show that we needed the whole route to be looked at in its entirety, and also the B2B partnership, and we've won that argument. So they're now doing that, and that's already starting to show dividends, because Network Rail are now supporting us against the pressure of Midlands Connect. Midlands Connect, who wanted fast services from the Midlands to Bristol, which means that you then it messes up getting slower stopping trains along the line and regional services. Network Rail taking on board our comments. It looks like they will, in development of those new services along that line, will not be, hopefully not susceptible anyway. It doesn't look like they'll be susceptible to listening to Midlands Connect to go for the fast services, which actually disadvantage the stations within Gloucestershire.
Yeah, my interest was in Charfield Station, where things have changed and there's a new report, I think, in December, and it's very likely now that will open in 2024. That was the point I was making there, really.
Right.
On the other two, Chairman, are on 4.11 on page 19. First of those is the fourth bullet point down about the contributions to library contributions have been challenged and declined by district councils, which have now failed to secure. Sorry, we have now failed to secure several £1 million. So I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit. And the other one there is the Stroud local plan and the consultation on the draft. Of course, things have changed there because of the government's U-turn or something similar on the planning for the future white paper. You've gone quiet, Colin.
Colin, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. In respect to the library contributions, this comes back to a SIL Section 106 issue through the local plans, which we as a council are pressing hard back against the districts and obviously developments that come in to argue the case that we need to have that infrastructure funding for both libraries and for schools as part of any development deal, because it's absolutely key to provide the necessary infrastructure for the future, both from a library and education perspective. Unfortunately, what's happened is SIL has actually confused that somewhat, because there's a SIL contribution which may not necessarily include, or doesn't generally include, libraries or schooling. And then what happens is we're finding is the developers are now saying, well, we're giving you SIL, why should we use Section 106 as well? And in fact, we have a test case almost to that effect in starting in about a week's time. So there Simon wants to say any more about that, because he's embroiled right in the thick of it. So Simon, did you want to comment? Unusually, I've almost got my full team here today rather than just me in part. So I'll spread it around.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I can certainly add to what Colin said there. We're not in a good position, to be honest with you, on quite a few of these applications which have come in for the reasons that Colin's outlined, in that we are battling quite often with developers and indeed some district councils to try and ensure that we secure the education and library contributions that we've requested. Now, unfortunately, in a two-tier system of planning, as we have in Gloucestershire, we can only provide advice to the district councils, but not insist on obtaining these monies. That's the system. So my team ensure that we provide that advice to the district councils when we are consulted on planning applications. Quite often that advice is taken. Great, that's the end of that, and we get the legal agreement signed and sealed. On occasion, and I can give several examples if members wish to contact me outside of this meeting, where unfortunately the developers have disagreed with the sums that we've put forward and suggested in some instances significantly lower sums, and indeed the district councils on occasion have done the same, and for various reasons, whether that be perceived viability of a site, whether that be the need for affordable housing. There's all sorts of different reasons why, unfortunately, our demands, if that's the right word, are not being adhered to. So I stand by the wording I've put in the report. There are several instances in total now where we have failed to secure millions of pounds worth of education and library contributions. That is over various plan applications, over various locations. So we continue to battle it out with developers. We continue to negotiate with district councils, and then Colin's alluded to later this month there is what could be a groundbreaking case where we are up against Hitchins and Bovis for a plan application in Tewkesbury Borough, and we've got a QC lined up in order to put our case forward. I see that case potentially being as a precedent-setting one. So we're taking that one extremely seriously. So yeah, not an ideal position, but you have my assurance, members, that we at the County Council are doing everything we can to try and secure this vital infrastructure for Gloucestershire.
My other one was on the Stroud local plan and concern about the development of sharpness and so on, and whether things would change now, given that the planning for the future proposals on distribution of new housing seem to have been rejected.
I can take that again, Chair, if you wish. Again, Councillor Cordra, as you're aware, Stroud local plan is obviously Stroud District Council's plan, not ours. Again, we are merely a, in this case, statutory consultee. We continue to liaise and engage closely with Stroud District Council, and as you'll see from the paperwork in front of you, we did respond to the latest Stroud District Council consultation back in December 2020. In light of recent government advice, you're perfectly correct. It may well be that Stroud District Council now have to have a bit of a rethink. They might have to change their housing numbers, and in light of the responses received on the consultation, they might want to have a rethink about the distribution of their housing and other employment land. So the board is very much in Stroud District Council's court. They have all the information they require from us at the moment, and as soon as I hear what Stroud District Council are going to do, I'll be able to update the Executive Director's report accordingly.
Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Simon, it's probably worth just making a comment as well, Councillor Caldwell, that we as a council are objecting to the sharpness development. We do not believe it's sustainable in its current form as it's been put forward, both in terms of the road network not being railway line. And what we do know is that and it comes out of our rail strategy document that it is impossible to actually deliver the level of services that they believe they can more without putting the southwest call.
Colin,
you would end up using their cars from a very early stage in the development. That's why we're objecting.
Colin, sorry. This is Rob Bird. My guess is that your connection has been inconsistent. I've only heard you intermittently. Councillor Caldwell, is that correct?
That's correct. I got the gist of it. That the infrastructure isn't there to support the development, including the rail system.
Is there?
Sorry, Chair, I drop out there. I've gone on, so I've taken.
Okay, Colin, you appear to have been dropping in and out and breaking up. That's it. So I'm not sure if Councillor Caldwell has managed to hear everything he wants to hear, or if we're going to ask you to repeat some of that.
Well, as I say, I thought it was a case of infrastructure issues regarding the development there, and in particular, perhaps the state of the railway connection and what could be achieved there. I know that there's a voluntary group working on Berkeley at the moment, railway.
Thank you, Councillor. Colin, do you want to come back? Or
so I think I dropped out for a bit there. Sorry, I didn't hear what Councillor Caldwell asked actually in terms of his question. Apologies. I tried to answer the first one, but I didn't have the answer to it. But I think John, I don't know whether Councillor Caldwell was then coming back with supplementary or it was just a follow up from the earlier question. Sorry, in terms of I think hopefully if I caught it and you can hear me now.
We can.
The obviously at the moment it's a freight line, so it's got to be upgraded quite substantially. But the chords pointing in the wrong direction as it comes back to the main line. The curves to get you back onto the main line. So the consequence of that, and the developer hasn't given any indication to replace those cords that are missing. So effectively, at the moment, it can only run. I think I'm right in saying it can only run a train from Sharpness up to Gloucester. It couldn't go southwards. And what we also know, talking to Network Rail, is just putting one train every now and again, say half hour, hourly, onto that line, can actually mess up all of the main line program as well. So it's something we have to be really, really careful about. What we found out in the rail strategy, what I said to the consultants was, can you see if you can get a railway line to be commercially viable, ignoring the capital costs? So even if the developer paid all the capital costs, would it operate through a fare box? And they couldn't, not with the level of developments being proposed there, 2,500 to 5,000 houses. So I said, okay, then let's assume it's 20,000 houses. Let's see if it will work now. And they still couldn't get it to work. So, okay, let's try and put a bridge across the river and join to Lydney, and then put 20,000 houses in Lydney. So we've got 20,000 at Lydney, 20,000 at Sharpness to create a critical mass. Will that then get the railway line to work properly? And they still could not get it to work on a commercial basis. So when you look at it at that point, you suddenly realise that. And the other thing is that it's really important to realise is that, you know, on day one there'll be one house or no houses. On 2 years in there might be 50 houses or 100 houses, but it's a very, very slow takeoff. And they're not going to run a railway line from day one. They'll run a railway line maybe when the development's finished, but by then, that's 10 years down the route, and everyone by then is used to using their cars, and you won't get them back out of their cars. And will you ever get to the point where you get a sufficiently strong enough rail service to attract people out their cars back? I doubt it very much. And if, as we tested, with 20,000 houses on either side of the river, you still couldn't get it to work. It's there that's when you start saying, do you know what? There's far better places to put new development in Gloucestershire that is far more sustainable than that. And if you look at it, it's quite logical. If you put a new railway station on a main railway line, then from day one you can stop a train there that's already on that line, start picking up when you only got 10 residents, and as it grows, so you then just make the service a bit more frequent, and so you're already using the infrastructure and the services that are already there. When you're trying to do something like this, you need a massive development to get the critical mass to make it work. And it's a great storyline, and it's really sellable to people until you look into the detail and you realise that when you do the engineering sort of calculations on it, you suddenly realise just how unviable it is from an early stage. So hopefully it's giving you a flavour of where we are.
Yes, a very good flavour. Thank you very much for the detailed response.
Councillor Hurst, I think you were indicating originally some time ago.
Yes, thank you. I've got two questions, different questions. The first question is, can we be assured of County Council's support for the opening or reopening of community rail stations which are on existing main lines, such as, let's say, Stonehouse and Sharfield? And the second question is, I'm interested about libraries giving sessions on things like 3D printers. Do libraries actually carry 3D printers, or are we looking at virtual presentations?
Okay, let me do the easy bit first. So I'll go in reverse order. Where the libraries are concerned, the innovation centres, the innovation lab that we've got at Colford has a 3D printer, has two 3D printers actually, has a plastic one and it has a pottery one, and it has full 3D scanning abilities as well. Those facilities we put in all of our new 5 extra innovation labs. So every innovation lab will have those facilities as they're rolled out over the next year. And they'll be designed really to encourage, excite, enthuse young people from 5 years of age into cyber and into IT, because that's where we see the county going in the future. But also, as I said, to provide necessary services, support services to SMEs who can use those facilities for product development and things like that. And to support that, I probably should have said earlier, we're also doing each of those. We're doing it in the libraries, but also doing it. We're going to do this in all the libraries, but then have a real strong focus innovation labs as well. Is that we will also have a link into the Intellectual Property Rights Bureau. So effectively, people can check patents out and register patents, that sort of thing, from our libraries. And at the same time, we are also I don't even remember the German Mintel collections you used to get, which gave you all the information on companies in the country, how they work, what their structure is, their products, their how they all the insider and information to help people to either research a company if you're going to go for a job, or to if you're developing your own SME to learn from their mistakes and that sort of thing. Well, that's now all available in a far more extensive form, available on computer as a resource and now we're rolling that out to all our libraries, and in particular again strengthen position in our innovation lab. So I see our libraries, particularly where we get the innovation lab into a new one in every district, has been real centres for enabling people to do necessary research, for SMEs to develop and gain necessary skills and experience they need to learn about the market and check out patents, etc. And you can all that from the locality of one of our libraries.
That's really good news, Colin. Thank you.
Okay, that's the first one. That was the easy one. Right, the second one is more difficult because I'm probably not going to tell you what you want to hear. And it's simply this, that I would love to say we could support every new rail station that people want. But it comes back to critical mass again that I was just talking about with Stonehouse. And for every person you improve their convenience by putting a new railway station in, by implication, if you've got a train that's 3/4 full, those other 3/4 of the 3/4 of the train are inconvenienced by that extra stop. And that's sort of a sad fact of life. And it's on a large scale, it's exactly the same argument I'm having with Network Rail, where I'm taking the other side of the argument, which is, and with Midlands Connect, I do not want fast services going from Bristol to Birmingham. I want trains to stop in the county.
Sure.
But there's got to be a balance, because what you don't want is like a metro type service, like a tube where it stops every 2 minutes, because someone who's got to go from Birmingham to Bristol, then it becomes an awfully painful journey. So there's a balance to be struck. And what Network Rail have said is that we can probably, between Bristol and Worcester, accommodate 1, maybe 2 new stations. And what we've got to do, I believe, as a county, is sit down and think, not just from a transport perspective, but for our long-term strategic position as a county, where we want those stations to be. Because what we want to do, and this is going back to the sharpness argument, is we want those stations to be where we can put the best chance of large-scale growth in the future, because effectively we want to provide sustainable development. And if we are going to grow the county like we need to grow the county, we probably need two communities of probably ultimately at 40,000 houses or something like that, 30,000 houses. Now they will quite easily, on an existing railway line, easily through a fare box, 10,000 to 20,000 houses would easily pay through a fare box for the station as well, the capital cost of it. And what we need to do is look at where we want those stations for the best impact for the county long term. And what I don't want to do is use those 1 or 2 opportunities we've got to put a new station in, and we put them in areas that have already got or very close to a railway station, where probably by better local linkages we could link people into the stations that are already there, and probably better use those 1 or 2 opportunities we've got to place strategically new stations that can make a real difference. So, for example, a station, rather than put a station at Stonehouse, which is south of the split in the railway line, so it's of limited use, where the London line comes off, it may well be better to put a station, a new station, say between Stonehouse and Gloucester somewhere, Standish, or in that area. Because if you did it there, you've got the opportunity then to, just using this as a theoretical argument, you've got the opportunity then to probably put a new garden new garden town of 20,000 houses around a railway station, so it would be it would be sustainable. It would have, unlike this unlike reopening an old station at Stonehouse, it would be north of that junction, so the trains could go both to London and to Bristol. It would have the advantage that people, for example, in Stroud, who wanted to go to Bristol, could either travel to that station or get on the train and go to that station, then change trains to go down to Bristol. So you gain all those advantages because it's strategically placed. And at the same time, you could, unlike you would have the ability at, say, Stonehouse, to put maybe a large car park, a park and ride facility, and make and take as a parkway station, be very close to junctions 12 and 13. So you could actually even draw cars off the M5 and use it to park and ride as well at the same time. So there, a strategically placed railway station versus, say, a local station reopening, if you see what I mean, what we need to do is be really careful where we want to put those stations, those one or two stations we got, to make a real difference to the county in the future, that add real value. And that station would still only probably be 3, maybe 4 kilometres from Stonehouse. So if we then got a strategy which basically we really improve, we have fast bus links, for example, or even, like extend the guided bus route we're talking about, or something like that between, from Gloucester down southwards towards Stonehouse, and start linking up and providing the local connections to those stations from other areas, then we start to have a real transport system that works sustainably in the future.
Sure, you're right, dead right. But we have to start thinking about it, don't we?
Well, we are, and we've actually already put an outline, as Nigel knows, we put an outline strategic document forward that we discussed with the chief execs of the districts that actually start to put that model forward. Nigel and myself and Patrick have been round and spoken to the leaders of all the different councils floating this idea. And the problem is, it's going to push against, it's going to run against the grain a bit, because it will need a completely different approach from the districts, from their current incremental approach to local planning, which is they just keep putting another ring of development around an existing town and just pushing development out further and further and making it less and less sustainable. And what it will do is challenge about, no, we need to build in the county in a strategic way, looking at where we can make things most sustainable for the long-term future and benefit of the county, taking account of the economy and environment, not just what it does. We will then start pushing it a little bit further later in the year.
Okay, Colin, many thanks. Thank you. Best of luck.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Colin. Do I have anybody else? Sophie, looking to say?
Councillor Rachel Smith as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And I was going to raise this. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. I was going to raise the same question really about the Stonehouse Bristol Road station. So it's really useful to hear that thinking, Colin. I hope that you're in close contact with. I know Stonehouse Town Council have been really on board and doing a lot of work. So and there's obviously a campaign group. So I hope you're in touch with them. I was going to ask about cycling, and I noticed that there's some kind of consultation or evaluation around the A4 and 9 works that have taken place in Stonehouse, and I understand that there are some concerns from cyclists' point of view about that corridor, and I wonder if you've had a chance to talk to that group or those, or hear those voices.
Yes, Kath, we're in constant dialogue with those people. I think the issue really blew up on the new A419 junction, if I had been here at the time, I wouldn't have allowed that scheme to go forward, I'll be honest with you. It was more of a traditional thinking type scheme that probably put the motorist above the cyclist, and it's not my way of thinking. And we need a balanced way. There are times that you will do that, and there's times you won't do that. And I don't believe we really probably got it right on that scheme. I'll be completely honest, because the new guidelines hadn't come out at that time. But it wasn't just about new guidelines. It's about the way you actually look and think. To be perfectly honest. What I have done is I've looked at those drawings myself and gone through them. As we brought in or about to introduce or have been introduced now have actually made cyclists feel a lot more.
So Smith, Colin, certainly what I heard was once again rather disrupted. Did you get your answer, or do you?
I'm afraid I missed quite a big chunk of that. I wasn't sure if it was just me. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair, would you like me to say it again? If you can hear me this time.
Yeah.
Over to you, Councillor Smith, first to say what you. Yeah.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll go back off. I found you was asking me asked a couple of questions. And I was nodding, so I realised you couldn't see me nodding, so I put my video back on. That messed it all up again. So apologies for that. It was done with the best will in the world. The A419 scheme, I think what you're actually talking about is a large roundabout that's been put in the scheme there, and I think it's rather best way to describe it is it's a design that I would not allow today. It was a historic design that was moved forward and had been developed some time ago. It's brought a whole raft of challenges that I have made within my own department about getting the basics right and getting the thinking right from the start, where you start off with an inclusive design rather than trying to retrofit cycle facilities onto a highway network. And I think I made those views very, very clear amongst my team. And in fact, I have personally sat down with drawings and made suggestions of how we can best amend that scheme to better meet the needs of cyclists. And those proposals have been drawn up and discussed with various cycling groups, who I believe has actually met a number of their issues and problems, and they are far more happy with that scheme now. Those amendments are, I don't know whether they're all being implemented or partly implemented, but obviously in the process of being implemented now.
Yeah, thank you. And just another question, just briefly. During the kind of lockdown period last year, and there was the Department for Transport emergency active travel schemes, and some of those projects are coming forward, I understand, and then some of them are not. I just wonder what's happening with those some of those schemes that were bid for but weren't successful. Are they still going to be? Are we still going to kind of look for funding, particularly around the kind of London Road area, Stroud, and there was a suggestion there, but just it'd be good to get an update on those schemes that weren't successful funding wise.
Well, Councillor Smith, you must have been reading my emails last night. It was a discussion I was only having with my team last night, actually. At the moment, we are drawing up a list of those schemes that have been submitted to see how much money we've got before the end of the financial year, to see if we can at least move some of those schemes forward from a design perspective ourselves with our own funding, so that if the funding pots become available, we can then look to then move them forward and put bids in with those schemes, because we've already got a scheme, a bottom drawer scheme we can pull out and submit. However, what I would say is that we're doing that in parallel with developing a spine through the county, because I think one thing I don't think we've done well in the county is created contiguous cycle lane. We've done very well at putting bits and pieces here, there and everywhere, but they're not joined up properly. And I think the focus we've really got to do over the next year to 18 months is build the spine from Stroud, as I just said, using the canal route out to Saul, and then up the canal, up the Sharpness, Gloucester Canal to Gloucester, fill in the missing bit from the end of the canal at Gloucester to this London Road, and then get the B4603 constructed within the next year, right the way through to Cheltenham to join with the work that's currently going on the A40, to take that out to the other side of Cheltenham, and then to look at how we then get the final stage up from up to Bishop's Cleeve. That'll give us a spine right through the county that we can build from and connect into. So you don't just do a few hundred metres of cycle lane, it just stops and doesn't do anyone any good at all. So that's the real focus. But yes, in parallel, we are looking, as I just said, into those other schemes where, I mean, 2 of those schemes, I think, if not 3 of them, actually joined into that. So there's not a real problem. There's a couple that are out on a limb a bit more, which makes it a bit more difficult to do. But the idea is basically to develop those schemes, to the bottom drawer schemes, so they're ready that if there's a funding opportunity comes up, we can whack them in, secure the funding and implement the schemes.
Thank you, and just congratulations on the canal action. That looks really exciting. So well done on that one.
Thank you.
Sophie, have we got anybody else indicating?
Councillor Cromwell and Councillor Patel.
Oh, yeah. Righto. Well, you mentioned Councillor Cromwell first, so I'll go to him.
Thank you. Colin, you say that the smaller schemes won't do anybody any good at all. That's actually not strictly true, and a bit of a bad statement to make. We've got smaller schemes that we want to run in our area, which are some of the ones that were shovel ready, and they would benefit quite a lot of people and make a big difference. So that statement I'm not particularly impressed with, sir.
I didn't say they wouldn't do any good. What I said was our focus needs to be on the majors, getting the spine, because effectively, if you do little bits and pieces, we end up with a broken network. And what we really want to do is encourage people to cycle. And it's far better to get your spine through and then connect into that spine, so people can actually make those journeys necessary, than start and 100 metres later it runs out again. As a cyclist, I get so frustrated cycling around Gloucestershire, and I know Philip feels exactly the same. I couldn't believe it when I first arrived, and Nigel knows my view that that within 2 weeks of arriving, I brought my bike with me, went out on my bike one evening, and just could not believe how sort of broken the cycle routes were, because they did not connect. And I think Nigel has a similar view. And I think we've all made that commitment that what we need to do is really drive hard over the next 18 months to get that spine, and then build from that spine out. That doesn't stop us doing the other bits and pieces, but what I wouldn't want to do at the moment is divert funding from getting that major spine through into doing bits and pieces. Let's get the spine through, and then we can build from that, and then connect up with the bits that we badly need to connect up. So there is continuity for people who want to get from A to B, rather than ride 100 metres feeling safe and then feel really exposed because they're out on a main road again and there's no protection.
Yeah, I mean,
it's about priority. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's about the immediate prioritisation, Councillor Cromwell. I'm not saying we're not going to do it. What I'm saying is what we need to do first to get those things, to get into a position of strength to then build the cycle route from.
Yeah, I totally understand that, but some of these routes wouldn't join up to the main route anyway. But they would enable people to actually, for instance, get from areas outside of town into town. They would allow people to get from from areas to industrial, to get to work. It would, it's about enabling other people to actually cycle a bike as well. It's not about keeping cyclists that want to ride around Gloucestershire. It's about sometimes enabling people to get from A to B and not have to use the car. Not always about, obviously, me wanting to cycle from Tewkesbury through Cheltenham to Gloucester up to Stroud. It's something about me just wanting to be able to cycle, leave my car where it's parked, go up the road. That's all.
And but there's got to be a level of prioritisation. And I'm not saying that we're not going to do it. What I'm saying is what our first priority is at the moment. What we're also doing in parallel with that is developing the 5 schemes that went in as part of the ATF. And obviously there's a whole walking and cycling strategy which addresses all of those issues and has prioritised and identified all those schemes to be implemented as and when funding becomes available. And it may not be just relying on county funding, and that's the beauty about getting some of these schemes into bottom drawer stage, so that effectively where there's a funding mechanism that comes up, like a government opportunity, something we can bid for those schemes knowing they're already done. If there's a development that comes online and we can secure Section 106 to develop those schemes and put them in, and that's all part of that overall approach to implementing, as quickly as possible a cycle, a programmed and prioritised cycle facilities within the county.
About that, I just think that we need to develop that they need to be developed in tandem, not necessarily creating an M5 of cycleways and forget about the other people that also need the we've gone through COVID. We've had people that have taken up cycling. They've now gone back into the car because certain routes still aren't safe for them. So I'll be honest. I don't think we need to concentrate on one. I think we need to look at all. Thank you.
Well, can I just come back to that? I would love to concentrate on everything, but then that comes back down to budgets again, doesn't it? What I'm saying is where we've got the money and we know we can go for money, what we need to do immediately. Yes, would I like to have a really comprehensive cycle network for the whole of the county? Absolutely. Would I like to have it delivered by the end of the year? Fantastic. But that is serious money. You already heard about how much it's costing just to get the backbone through at the moment and putting that funding together. And therefore it is, and I think I did say, I actually use those words, we are working both of them in parallel, or you think you used the word tandem. So I think we're saying exactly the same.
Thank you, Colin. I guess Councillor Cromwell has finished. Before I come to Councillor Patello, can I just follow up on something you said there about the 5 ATF? Because the whole issue of funding and lots of different funding gets a bit confusing. And you referred to 5 ATF schemes. Could you just re-specify what those 5 schemes are, please, Colin?
Yeah, I'll try and do that off the top of my head. There's basically one in each district, and 2 are directly. One is Gloucester is to connect the end of the Sharpness Canal up to London Road. Cheltenham is to connect the station out to the Bourne side, I think it is. Can someone help me there? Is that right? Go on, Philip. Which one is it?
I think it was the A435.
I think you might be right. I think it's the A435.
Up to Bishop's Cleeve.
The FOD is a real standalone scheme, and I can't remember exactly where it is. Simon, have you got any? While I'm talking, have you been able to look it up on your on the emails that were flying around last night?
Trying and failing at the moment, Colin, but perhaps this is one that we take offline and we.
I think it probably we'll just let you know. I think, but I could just get hold of I could just get an email, or someone just got an email probably, and it was in an email at like 11 o'clock last night, flying around with about how I was going to deal with it. So they're there. They were the 5 schemes that were actually. The reason it's 5 is because Gloucester already had the London Road and other stuff. So, but each district has got a 1 EATF scheme that they actually prioritised and asked us to include it. So it's one of those schemes, those 5. But we'll send that list out to you.
Okay, thank you. Because I think each district was asked to put forward 3, weren't they, initially, when the ATF funding became available. Is that correct, Colin?
That's well. We asked for 3 so that we could because we knew we'd only ever do 1, so we could actually make sure that whichever 3 you put forward, we then tested against the conditions of that are being set as part of the ATF to then judge which one stood the best chance of going through using the various methods that they'd asked us to check against those schemes. So then we picked the best one for each district that we thought was going to stand best chance. As it was, we didn't get any of them funded, and we only got part of the B4603 funded, which we're appealing against at the moment.
Thanks, Colin. My apologies. It was just you made a comment in your responses to Councillor Cromwell, so I thought I'd just pick up on that thread. Councillor Patel, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to a couple of points. The first one, I do agree with Councillor Cromwell that and it's something I'm pleased that Colin has said it is being looked into, in tandem with the actual spine of the cycle lane. And it's important because there are a lot of residents in the city, in Gloucester, certainly in my ward, do make a lot of short journeys, where if we can get them away from their cars and using cycles in a safe place, then that would be great. And I'm sure the community would welcome that. But another question I have is around the enforcement with these cycle lanes. Who will be ultimately responsible for enforcement where cars are illegally parking on the cycle lanes? And I've seen it myself on London Road, which can then obviously make it unsafe for the cyclists and quite dangerous, frankly. And my final question was regarding the waste recycling centres and with regard to the waiting times at Hempstead and Pike Quarry. I did have a resident ask me 2 days ago about the waiting time, why it's so long. So I just wondered whether there's anything more we can do to, or is already being done to reduce the waiting times for slots at Hempstead and others. Thank you.
Because I've gone, I think he's bouncing back to unmute. Trouble with IT this morning. The Pike and Hempstead. Pike in particular has always been our sort of bête noire. That's the one that we have the most difficulty with, and we are looking at ways we can improve the throughput there, but it is going to be very difficult. And we've probably stretched the slots probably about as far as we can. And I don't know if Nigel wants to. Nigel only had a meeting to discuss this a couple of days ago, and I wasn't able to get there. So Nigel,
yeah, when you finish, Colin, I'm happy to take that one up.
Okay. And the cycling, absolutely agree, Councillor Patel. When I came into Gloucester, I think in November, we did the filming. I thought London Road was fantastic, and then I walked back down the road in the evening and saw a number of cars parked there and went ballistic, as Philip knows only too well. And it turned out that in a couple of places, several of the places, the contractor hadn't put the necessary weighting restriction plates up, so it wasn't enforceable. I think they're up now, and I would hope that enforcement. I'm going to bring Philip in a second to comment on that. Because I've been insistent that we start enforcing rigorously as soon as possible. Longer term, with the mandatory cycle lanes that we're putting in there, I think they are substantially working compared to advisory ones. But we do need to carry out enforcement, which we can do by use of cameras. So it may be longer term, because trying to get the police to enforce is like mission impossible on situations like that. So one thing may well be, I don't think we only way we could, because of a moving traffic offence, we can't actually, we can do people for parking, which is why we've put double yellow lines in as well as a mandatory cycle lane to back up the mandatory cycle lane so we can enforce. But people driving in it is a moving traffic offence, which is more difficult for us. It's actually a police enforceable offence, though we can enforce if we've got cameras there. So that if we had an area where we felt there was consistent abuse, then we would possibly look longer term to put a camera in. But what we've done as far as the parking is concerned, if you look, we've basically backed up our mandatory cycle lanes. You shouldn't have to do, But knowing that the police wouldn't enforce, we put double yellow lines all the way through to make sure we could stop people parking in them. Philip, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm really pleased to say that I have seen the enforcement officers out at London Road, and I know that they have been issuing tickets. They've said that the situation is improving, and I can assure you that it is better than it was in November. All the signs and lines are in place to allow us to do this confidently. The government introduced new powers for local authorities outside London to enforce cycle lanes back in the summer. So we also have a project that's about using one of our spare cameras possibly to enforce some of the cycle lane parking on London Road, as there seems to be, I mean, the usual offenders are cash points and takeaways, and we've got both in that area. So the other thing, Colin's, I'd just like to add to what Colin has said is that our capacity to deliver and design and develop cycle schemes, and particularly smaller cycle schemes, could be significantly improved, subject to the budget, really, with the inclusion of funding that the Cabinet has put forward for a traffic team and a design team there. That money is there to enable us to do more in-house work more speedily and at a more cost-effective, on a more cost-effective basis, rather than having to farm everything out to consultants, which takes time and costs a lot of money.
Councillor Patel?
Should I answer?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Councillor Patel's questions about the HRCs?
Yeah.
I mean, Sajid, one of the advantages if we go to a permanent booking system is that we would most likely develop a new platform. What we had to do, because of the urgency, was to really use an existing GCC platform, which has a drawback of being pretty inflexible. So at the moment, people book a slot, and if they don't turn up, there's nothing we can do about it. There's no flexibility. With a new system, we could have a situation where people, if they do have a change of plan, they can't get to the date they've been allocated, they will be able to change that date. And we would obviously encourage people, in terms of the community spirit, to be good about that, to use the facility, and as a result, reduce the number of no-shows. We've done some analysis at Pike, and Pike is our difficulty because it's a congested site. It also has the strongest demand, but counterintuitively, it also has the biggest number of no-shows. So it's a double whammy in effect. So there, with a more responsive system, we could certainly improve on the waiting times. At the moment, Hempstead is 6 days to get a booking. Wingmore is 1 day. And if you're talking to any constituents, it's always worth pointing out that Wingmore is usually only a day. So if they are prepared to make that longer journey, if it's an urgent need, that's an opportunity to them. But as Colin intimated earlier on, I'm discussing with Cabinet colleagues next week the proposition that we look at a permanent system and look at the revenue implications of that. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Patel?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I just had a follow-up question on the cycle lanes, and what we do have to make sure, and what we do have to ensure, is that where we are installing these cycle lanes, that the actual highway is safe and fit for purpose as well. Because what you can find experience as a motorist on London Road, where there's a collapsing manhole in the middle of the road, and that's been an issue for quite some time. So in order to avoid these manholes and also potholes, motorists will obviously dodge them, and as a result of that, they will either weave left or weave right. And if they weave left, they're going to be going through a cycle lane. So that can be dangerous for cyclists as well. So we do have to make sure that those road surfaces are safe for the vehicles who are using the road as well, and not compromising the safety of the cyclists at the same time. I know the one on London Road, as you go up towards Barnwood, towards Cheltenham Road, I've had to weave to the left onto the cycle lane to avoid, my car being damaged. I'm sure other road users are doing the same. I just thought I'll add that point, please. Thank you.
Mute then. Okay, that point made. Councillor Patel. Councillor Cromwell, I think you're indicating.
Yeah, it's very quickly coming back on the HRCs. I know a lot of people from Tewkesbury now go to Upton because there is no booking system in Upton upon Severn, so they don't actually bother to go to Stoke Orchard anymore because there is a booking system. So they actually go to Worcestershire and over to Upton, and I hear that quite a lot actually. And the other situation is, I was at a meeting yesterday at Tewkesbury Borough Council where our fly tipping is increased by a huge, extraordinary amount, and I just wondered if there was any correlation to that as well.
I'll happy to take those both up. I think at the moment, not having a booking system, I would regard as being irresponsible. One of the big advantages of a booking system is that we can better manage the people visiting the HRCs, and in terms of social distancing, that is really important. And the last time I went to Foss, we have a Ubico employee on the gate who can then direct you to a parking space which is COVID safe, and the whole thing is a good experience. And I would not wish to go back off from that, Councillor Cromwell, because of the implications. And we've heard over the last few days and seen pictures online, people just ignoring social distancing, and that's not something I would be at all comfortable with. Just remind me the second point you introduced on that. One was people going to another site.
Obviously, yeah. I've been to Upton myself, and I can assure you, it is done. When we go to supermarkets, there's areas where people ignore it and do what they want to do anyway. But to be in the main, whenever I've been there, the experience has been always fine because people do adhere to social distancing themselves because that's what they're it's now ingrained into us to do. There's those that ignore it and always choose to ignore it anyway. And the other point was the fact that I was at a meeting yesterday where our Tewkesbury Borough's fly tipping is increased by a huge amount, and I mean a huge amount. And I just wondered if there's any correlation, with the fact that we are doing the booking system and the fact that fly tipping is increased in areas.
I've asked officers about this quite a few times, and basically fly tipping is in the main is a criminal commercial operation. I don't think that people who can't get to the HRC for a couple of days are then going to go out and just basically tip it anywhere. So I think there's a lot of exaggeration about the correlation has not been proven because it, as I say, fly tipping in the main is a criminal activity where essentially organisations are taking material away for a price and then being totally irresponsible how they deal with it.
Yeah, I'd come back on that. I would say you're right, but obviously, people who can't get rid of their rubbish or are struggling to get rid of their rubbish are just giving money to unscrupulous people who are taking their rubbish away for them. Yes, at a price, but they're taking away for them, but then they're tipping it for free, in a lay-by somewhere. So, I'm just saying, you're saying there isn't a correlation. I would actually argue that there is a little bit of a correlation because, why would it have increased to the level it has? When there's little or no, when there's been a change to the way we work.
My overall response is that I certainly stand by wanting to retain the booking system, as do officers. What we'd like to do is to have it on a permanent basis so that we can improve the platform and basically that will help us to bring down the waiting times. At the moment, we're basically working on a contingency plan, which I think in all the circumstances has served us well, but it's certainly not a platform that we'll want to maintain in perpetuity. So there will be the opportunity to revise that platform.
Okay, thank you both. I think we've covered that topic. At the moment, I'm just looking. Sophie, do you have anybody else indicating that I've missed?
No, there's no one else, Chair.
Okay. I think, therefore, we've probably come to the end of that item. I'm just making sure that. So that was, started a long time ago, but just to remind everyone, that was Colin's Executive Director's report. Thank you, Colin, and thank you to the other officers who've got involved in this. I think, and I can't see anybody else, so I'll bring that item to a close then. Thank you very much. Which brings us just to the final points on our agenda about work plan and future meetings. So the next meeting is set up for the 3rd of March, and the work plan it's been set out in the agenda papers. There's one specific item on rail. Sorry, I haven't got it in front of me. Sophie, can you? Is it rail connectivity? Was that the phrase?
Rail developments.
The rail developments. Thank you. That was and so we have that set up to as an item. There was a potential item that has been raised to do with highways flooding issues. That's been set up, and at this point I see that Councillor Nigel Moore has indicated he wants to speak. Was that on what I'm saying here? Over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chairman. I think it would be very opportune to have the flooding issue on that March meeting. That would give Vernon and I and the with Simon and the flood team the opportunity to pull together really an overview of basically the events just before Christmas. As you can understand, we are getting reports in from right across the county, which we are investigating and correlating. So it would give us if you like, a deadline in order to basically present that information to environmental scrutiny. I think it would be a good message to our parishes and our districts that we do take this very seriously, and at the first opportunity we've got in terms of the work of this scrutiny committee, that we would present that overview. Vernon and I have been discussing with officers and Colin. Colin's an officer, but I sort of brought him out separately for that. That we're discussing a flood, let's call it a flood alleviation steering group at the moment, to tackle the range of issues that have emerged since the December event. So, well, over to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I will say you did rather take me by surprise in what you've just said there, because I'd been led to believe that there probably wasn't sufficient work available or breadth of, should we say, analysis available to bring this to as a scrutiny item. That the time that it was raised, it was very focused on one area. And I'm not. So I just want to check that you're quite. You've made that commitment, Councillor Moore, and I guess you've got the support of the relevant officers to do that, and to make sure that we can bring that onto the agenda for the meeting on the 3rd of March. Yeah.
I would hope so. I haven't heard any dissenting voices. I mean, Vernon and I and Colin, we've been discussing this particularly since scrutiny, because as you remember, scrutiny, it was one of the major issues that emerged at scrutiny. So clearly we are responding I think overall there is some urgency about this in terms of our communities.
Fine, thank you. As I said, it was just that I'd background information had given me some understanding, which has now turned out to be rather different. So, unless anybody else wants to say anything, then well,
Simon's waiting to speak.
Sorry, Simon.
Thanks, Chair. I think Vernon wants to come in as
And
well.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're not confusing issues here in that, and again, Colin might want to come in, because at last week's budget scrutiny, which I watched but didn't participate in, there was agreement that there would be a flood alleviation, and we're calling all sorts of different things. I've written down scrutiny panel, that may or may not be right. I just wanted to make sure we're not doubling up on workloads here, because I don't want my team coming to environment scrutiny with a paper and also going to whatever this new scrutiny panel or whatever it is as well. I don't know whether we're talking apples and pears here, and whether or not we should be coming to this committee or going to what DSU, I believe, are going to create or are in the process of creating as well. So I just wanted some clarification on that before we decide to take this to the 3rd of March Environment Scrutiny Committee.
Okay.
So I'll just come in as well. There's another issue as well that I just don't want any confusion between, because although flooding, it's not quite, because the flooding that occurred at Christmas was a very different sort of flooding than we had before, which was and that was actually surface water flooding. So it's a completely different sort of, it affects people in a completely different way, and people have never been affected before, and areas have never been affected before, where our normal sort of river fluvial flooding is fairly predictable. It's been fairly consistent for a long time. We know that the A417 at Mosmore, when it gets to a certain point, is going to flood and things like that. But this is a very different type of flooding. Often caused, Stroud was really badly affected because of the sheer volume of water running off the hills, for example, and things like that. So I think we need to be aware that we're not talking about cross purposes there as well, that people aren't expecting a solution right across the board. I think this is substantially about surface water flooding as against fluvial flooding.
Would agree.
Thank you, Colin. I think Vernon was also looking to contribute. Yeah, Vernon, Councillor Vernon Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate what we're saying. Yeah, I'd go with what Colin was saying as well. That this is the panel is looking at the storm event of December and to correlate all the work that we've been doing subsequently since 2007. So, though I agree with Nigel what he's saying about bringing to scrutiny, and I'd like it to come to scrutiny as soon as possible, I just think that we need to get those panels sitting to pick up all the information and evidence, and I'm not quite sure whether we'd be ready to go by March. I'd be advised by officers on that one, but I totally agree with what Nigel's saying. And yeah, I want it to come to scrutiny as soon as possible, but I'm just a little bit thinking that if we're having these panels, we will have to obviously gather the information. I know the flood team will work extensively putting the agendas together in correlating all the information to give a report, as Colin says, on a storm event that adds to the fluvial, because we're talking pluvial, rainfall, storm events.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my only concern, that would we be ready in time?
Thank you, Councillor Vernon Smith. I'm going to ask Sophie to come in at this point, and I will just say that at the moment now there seems to be some doubt in my mind as to what structure we are proposing here to actually deal with the issue. I understand it's the issue, but is how we are going to go about it through in a scrutiny process. Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. So I think what I would suggest at this point is for me to go away and understand the context of the task group that was requested at corporate scrutiny, because everyone that's mentioned was correct in thinking that we are going to be setting something up to directly look at flooding, and we don't want to duplicate that work, as Simon said. So if you can leave this with me to go away and understand whether scrutiny needs to get involved at this stage or whether it will wait until the task group has sort of done its work and it can come back and report to scrutiny. I think that would probably be the best way forward.
Thank you, Sophie.
Chairman, may I just say something?
Yeah, please. All I was going to say
I'm
is
a bit uncomfortable with this because I understand from Simon's point of view in terms of workload, and I would not want to duplicate that. And I don't think I'm suggesting that. I'm just concerned that we're putting process ahead of everything else. And what I'm getting, and I've shared it with Vernon this morning. I had a very full report last night from the flood group in Bledington, giving a massive information about what happened, and they in fact have distributed that right across the piece, including the MP. I think as a council, we've got to be shown to be responsive. I don't think people are really interested, frankly, in our procedural niceties, being quite blunt. I will be blunt on this because it's in my division, Moulton, notwithstanding the over £1 million we've spent on the flood alleviation scheme, there are glitches that we need to deal with, and I went round that scheme yesterday with Lawrence King from Publica and identified some of the issues. So I think we have to demonstrate some urgency here, and frankly the March date is in the calendar. It's a date we can work towards. Sorry to be blunt, but I do feel strongly about it.
Clearly. Right, okay, so in essence, we have a proposal, therefore, that on the agenda for the next meeting of this committee is that item. We have, Sophie has advised us that as a result of what took place at corporate scrutiny, we need to work through what is required from that. I see no problem, actually, unless Sophie suddenly throws up her hands in horror and has a go at me, in maintaining the proposed agenda for our next meeting with that item on it. But obviously, Sophie and Democratic Services will go and have a look now at what commitments have been how we fulfill the commitments made at the corporate scrutiny meeting, and whether therefore there's any crossover that we need to consider and how we would best do with that. But at the moment, personally, as chair, I'm content that the item that is the proposed item sits on the agenda for our next meeting as we go. Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, that's absolutely fine. I personally don't understand the timescales of what was agreed for the flooding task group. So if I can have those conversations today, this week, I'll have a better understanding of how we can work this forward, and I'll work with officers outside the meeting.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Hopefully that satisfies everybody's concerns. I just had the thumbs up from Councillor Vernon Smith. I don't see anybody else indicating at the moment. So, Sophie, unless you've got anybody you're aware of who's looking to come back.
Councillor Rachel Smith has her hand up.
Thank you. Councillor Rachel Smith.
Thank you. And yeah, it's obviously the flooding issue we discussed in quite a lot of detail at last week's corporate overview budget scrutiny session, and it's obviously really important we talk about it. Just a little flag, which is I'm just not sure how much when we're setting scrutiny work planning, actually whether I seem to recall from the scrutiny review we had that cabinet members like the cabinet shouldn't set scrutiny work, and I don't doubt the kind of commitment and enthusiasm at all, but I just wanted to flag that as a kind of a question really of whether as a scrutiny committee, we should be setting those areas and not the cabinet members who are present. And I mean that in the greatest level of respect. I'm not trying to. It's just a question. I did have an area of work planning that I was keen that we do look at, which I think I mentioned at the last meeting, which is around the new environmental, particularly carbon emission assessment of cabinet decisions, and that is a new kind of metric that is being used in decision making. And it's something that I think we really need to look at as a scrutiny committee to find out how it's being developed and what meaning it will have for decision making as from the council's point of view. And I'd really urge that to be on the agenda on the 3rd of March.
Okay, so in response to your 2 points, firstly, the flood alleviation, or the flyways flooding and stroke alleviation issue had already been proposed for our committee, and so that's not coming from the cabinet. Councillor Moore, as a cabinet member, has merely made a commitment that subject that scrutiny item could be delivered upon for our committee meeting on the 3rd of March. So that's as I read that, and unless so far I've had no indication other than from yourself that for us as committee members that shouldn't continue to be on the agenda. In which case, that with that and the rail developments item, that would be quite sufficient for our agenda for the 3rd of March. I appreciate your interest in the topic you've just mentioned. I'm not quite sure how we could deliver on that, and normally in these circumstances I would go to the appropriate officer, and I will do that in just a moment. But I also see that both councillors Cromwell and Councillor Orford are indicating to speak, so could I just split up these two issues? As far as I'm concerned, the flooding, the highways flooding issue should be on the agenda as initially proposed, and that was just a commitment from the cabinet member that could indeed be delivered upon. Councillor Orford, do you want to speak?
Thank you, and to pick up on the point that Councillor Smith made, in fact, it isn't a proposal from Councillor Nigel Moore, because I flagged this up even before the budget session last week, where Nigel kindly and Vernon got behind the initiative to hold some sort of review. I don't see the duplication of the work particularly. I think Vernon's right about what we're looking here at is the surface water flooding, the impact on the infrastructure, highways, network, etc. The main river flooding is a bigger issue, which potentially I might pick up in any debate around the A417, for instance. But the two things are separate. I can see why Simon Excel would be worried about duplicating work, and the same for Colin. But it's just gathering all that information from the districts that were impacted. I know there were quite a few that had concerns about how we reacted from the emergency services point of view, for instance, and that's what came out at scrutiny. And I think at the session last week, and I think we can do that. And I think we could do some panel work and have a report ready for March. That would be my take.
Thank you, Councillor Orford. Councillor Cromwell, did you want to speak?
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite happy for it to come as long as we can do it justice, because I know, for instance, in Tewkesbury, which is different to up on the hills there, the reason why we had a lot of surface water drainage problems in Tewkesbury is because the outfall, which was already underwater because of the fluvial flooding, which was out of Bank River. So they are intimately linked, and I want to make sure that we can do it justice. I don't want, to just half go at something. I want to make sure we do go at it. I understand Nigel's point, and obviously up on the hills it was runoff, but for for instance, down in the valleys, down at the bottom where you all sent it to, our problem was our outlets were already flooded anyway, so that the water couldn't get off the roads and everywhere. So the runoff wasn't able to run off anywhere. So I'm happy if you think we can do it justice. If we can't do it justice, then that isn't scrutiny.
Well, thank you, Councillor Cromwell, and I think that was that point about whether we can do it justice is to be established, bearing in mind that, going back to what Sophie said about the conversations that need to take place and the work that needs to be done, comparing this situation, comparing what we're proposing with what the commitments made at corporate scrutiny. So as far as I'm concerned, as chair, I think we have an item on the agenda. We have 2 items for the agenda on the 3rd of March, and as things stand at the moment, that's the way it should be. To go back to Councillor Rachel Smith and your proposal, but you raising the topic that you did about scrutiny of cabinet. I can't remember the words exactly, but it was cabinet commitment to carbon reduction. Could I ask one of the officers to just come in and give some view as to at what point? Sorry, bearing in mind we have the meeting after the 3rd of March. The next one set up is the 16th of June. Now, at the moment, as we stand, that in theory would be in the next council, and that might well still be the case. However, as we know, everything's changing on a daily basis, and that might not be the case. And there is a possibility that this same committee might still be continuing and meeting again in June if the elections don't go ahead as planned. That's one possibility. At the moment, that's just in the realms of speculation, and we can't really. But there is nothing wrong with us putting forward items for consideration beyond the current planned election date in May for the next committee, if it is indeed a new committee, to consider. So, that a suggestion has been made by Councillor Rachel Smith. Could I just ask officers, or any officer who wants to comment on that, as to how that might be delivered upon? Is there anyone, or have I dropped somebody in it? Colin, you're looking puzzled.
No, the trouble is I didn't hear what Rachel Smith's thing was. My thing cracked up for that moment in time, so apologies for that.
Right. Okay. In that case, that's fine. Councillor Smith, can I ask you to reiterate what your work item proposal is there?
Yeah. And just to clarify on the flooding thing, I think we should look at it. It was just a scrutiny balance question thing. Okay.
Yep.
So within the climate change strategy, there has been a change to the way in which cabinet decisions are being looked at from a carbon emission point of view, because previously there was something about it was sort of yes, no, maybe, or yes, no, neutral on whether it would have an impact on climate change. And I understand that there is something coming that is going to be a little bit more detailed to help make appropriate decisions. And I think it's important that we look at it as the Environment Committee, because climate change and carbon emission and that whole agenda is so prominent in the council at the moment. It's important. So I think it would be useful. Sorry, it would be useful to have a look at it, basically.
I'm happy with that. Philip, have you got a view?
Yeah, I believe Pete's done some work on this. I would just say, obviously, yes, you want to look at it while it's at a formative stage. I would need to check with Pete whether, how far he's got with this. We are in the process of recruiting additional support for the team, and I don't want us to overpromise on something that's, you want to be able to see something which has got legs on it. And so my preference would be to be able to bring it perhaps to June at the very latest, but I'd need to check with Pete about the feasibility of bringing something to March.
Well, sorry, Phil, if I could just interrupt there as chair. It will not be coming to March. We've got two specific items on the agenda, which is sufficient for March. Okay, so the proposal here is that we could pencil it in for the June committee meeting.
I'm more comfortable with that myself.
Okay, and then obviously when we get to our March meeting as a committee, we can review that and see where we're at and take your advice from that point, Phil. Okay, Councillor Rachel Smith, are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Is there anything else we need to talk about as far as work planning goes? I don't think so. No, it doesn't look like it. Right. In which case, I will say thank you very much to everybody for your contributions. And goodbye. Look forward to seeing you on the 3rd of March. Thank you, everyone.